I'd just like to welcome Vic Marks. You probably all know what he's achieved in cricket, but as you know, we all like some statistics and some a story about what's been a very remarkable career, I would say. 6 Test matches, 34 one-day internationals for England, 12,419 first-class runs at 30.29, and 859 wickets at first-class wickets at 33.28. Then on top of that, there's 4,175 list day runs at 22.56 and 286 wickets at 27.85. So that was just the first part of Vic's career. Since then, he was the cricket correspondent for The Observer from 1990 to 2020. He continues to write on cricket for a number of different entities. And of course, he's been an expert summariser for Test Match Special for many years. Current activities including being on the board at Somerset and still very actively involved in cricket. I think it's probably fair to say that if any of us had the chance to swap that for what we've been doing for the last 50 years, we'd have been delighted to do it. And one of his least known achievements is that Vic's been a very good supporter of the Cricket Society. We all know he's done that. He's the vice president of the society, and we thank him over the years for all the support he's given us. So I'm just going to crack on now, and I think where I'd like to start, Vic, is
before you do, let me interrupt once with my one other. So you've got all those stats, and I'd just like to share it. I've probably have told people before, but there is one other stat that you have omitted, which is this: that no cricketer in the 80s in first-class cricket, no bowler, whatever country you choose, conceded as many runs as I did. So there you go. It's a sad but true stat. I've used it several times when I have to stand up just to get a bit of sympathy. And I thought a couple of years ago I'd ask Andy Zaltzman if it was actually true. And it took him about 90 seconds, and he came back to me and said, "Oh, yes, it's true. You conceded more runs than anyone else in that decade." It's a tribute to my fitness. Anyway, sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Thank you. It was practicing your art, clearly. So I'm going to just briefly take you back to 1984-85 tour of India. England spinners, I think, in that tour were Phil Edmonds, Pat Pocock, and yourself. You then returned the following summer, and Somerset played 24 matches in the county championship, plus everything else that happened in Sunday League and the Benson Hedges Cup and the Gillette Cup. We've just had 3 spinners on the Indian tour: Tom Hartley, Rian Ahmed, and Mo Bashir. Nathan Lyons signed for Lancashire, although I see today he's going home on the 3rd of July. Somerset already have Jack Leach. So what is going to happen to Tom Hartley and Mo Bashir this summer? Are they actually going to play any cricket?
Well, it's a huge problem from a Somerset perspective. Actually, without getting too much detail, we're not quite sure how fit Jack Leach is. I asked our cricket director yesterday, actually, is Jack Leach fit? And he gave me an odd answer, which was, well, he's still under the umbrella of the ECB. So they haven't told us yet. That was very strange. But the chances of anyone playing 2 spinners on April the 5th are incredibly short. I mean, it's not going to happen. So I think Shoaib probably understands at Somerset, Bashir, that he doesn't get in the team necessarily for the start of the season if Jack Leach is fit. Very often sides play no spinners on April the 5th for obvious reasons. So it's a real problem triggered by the way this fixture list is structured, that, in April, especially if it's been a damp March, the chances of spin bowling playing a big part and the chances of the ball seeming all over the place on damp surfaces, it's tough to get these guys any cricket. I mean, you mentioned that 84. I mean, just think of the contrast. Pat Pocock had probably taken about 900, 1,000 wickets by the time he arrived in India. Phil Edmonds, likewise, was pretty experienced. And it was amazing, wasn't it amazing, to see Shoaib, Tom Hartley, who I think Shoaib had taken 10 wickets before he set off on his Test career. I think Tom Hartley had taken about 35. And Rian Ahmed, who bowled reasonably well, actually, had, I don't know, 40 or 50 first-class wickets to his name. Absolutely incredible the way they managed to bowl India out, not to win games very often, but to, be perfectly respectable. It was amazing. But it is a real dilemma, partly due to the fixture list, partly due to the fact that pitches don't seem to disintegrate as quickly as they might, even if we ever get a chance to play any championship cricket in the summer. So Somerset have talked about being very open to the possibility of loaning out Shoaib, but not many people are looking for a spinner to take on loan on April the 10th. So it is a real problem. And I hope too, another consequence is that actually clubs are less fearful about pitches that turn a little bit, possibly right from the start. Because that's the only way you're going to get a little reservoir of good spin bowlers. Having said that, you have to take your hat off to the selectors for plucking two guys out from nowhere who kind of look the part. Shoaib especially, actually.
Yes, it's great. It was great to see, wasn't it? On the flip side, Jack Leach continues to justify his status as the most unlucky cricketer, hasn't he?
Yes.
The knee injury being the latest disaster for him. Would he still be your premier choice as the number one spinner for the England team?
Well, I think so. I think that's the case at Somerset. You have to sort of take into context the fact that in India they were all up against high quality batsmen, but there was assistance, some assistance. They weren't raging turners, but there was some help. I think Jack Leach has more experience, therefore, of bowling on pitches where the ball's not doing much. Both Hartley and Shoaib, their main virtue is they're tall and they bowl at quite a pace, quicker than spinners of old, possibly. And if the ball starts to grip a little bit, the quicker you bowl, often the better it is. But on surfaces that are not very helpful, which is often the case in England, then you need a bit more variation and a bit more time in the air. Not that Jack Leach is slow, actually, he's got quicker and quicker, but he has more experience of operating on a surface that's not helping him very much. So, I'm thinking from a Somerset perspective, I'm pretty sure that if Jack Leach was fit and they were going to play one spinner on April the 5th, under heavy cloud cover, etc., it would be Leach. I'm not so sure about England. It depends. It depends if they see the ball's going to turn. They must have been so impressed by Hartley and Bashir, and it was noticeable that actually McCullum, who's a very sort of loyal coach, but he would give, after that tour, he didn't give any guarantees that Leach was necessarily the number one. He's had some real hurdles to get over, Jack Leach, both in terms of his health, and then he had a bit of a throwing controversy, which seemed ridiculous, and then untimely injuries. It's an amazing career he's had, actually, but he is a resilient guy who loves the game, so he'll want to play. He loves playing for this England, actually.
And Somerset, certainly later in the season, generally like to encourage the spinners a bit, don't they?
Well, they did. To be honest, they did, but not so much the case in recent years. They got stung by a 15-point, docked 15 points and a suspended something or other. And actually, in the last couple of years, 2 or 3 years, they have been wary of producing pitches. I'm always wanting them actually quietly to try and get the ball to turn a little bit more. And I would be of the same mind this year with two blokes who've played for England. And it created, sometimes they got it slightly wrong and it did a bit too much, but my goodness, the cricket, it was gripping. But I have to tell you that, Somerset's pitches have not been offering the spinner much for the last 2 or 3 years, sometimes to my frustration, actually.
Yeah.
Because this is getting a bit parochial, but you can have pitches in April that with the ball jagging left and right for seamers constantly, and size being bowled out in 30 overs. And everyone says, well, that's what happens in England. But if you prepare a pitch that turns a bit from the first day, everyone is aghast, which obviously I don't think is a very good idea.
No. So you mentioned about the schedule. The other day, I was hearing Daryl Mitchell, who the ex-Worcester captain, who's now works at the PCA. He said it's obviously still remains the biggest challenge for both the players and the administrators, and they all seem to turn their ire towards Alan Fordham of the English Cricket Board, who has the unenviable task of feeding all the information into a computer and hoping something comes out that pleases everyone, that doesn't seem to please anyone. And the sub-question to this, which I'm sure a lot of people on the call would be interested in, is why can't we have more county cricket at the height of the summer?
Well, I think it's harsh to blame Alan Fordham for a start, because he's not the policy maker. He just gets given all these fixtures and say, well, just go and work it out. And I'm sure he would need an incredible brain and a weird mind to be able to do that. And he's never going to satisfy anyone. I mean, the blunt truth is that there's not really space for 4 competitions that we have at the moment. It's mildly absurd that we're starting on April the 5th. And we always turn up on April the 5th, and there'll probably be some photos in the press, either of sort of hail or completely empty stands. But who in their right mind is going to sit down for 6.5 hours in what will probably be, say, at the Riverside, 5 degrees, and risk, hypothermia? It's hardly surprising there'll be some empty stands, and cricket gets a bad press because of that. But 4 competitions, it's practically impossible, it seems to me, to fit everything in. The problem is that the toothpaste is out now. I think there was an opportunity before the 100 came along, and there was much discussion about what was going to happen. There was the possibility of creating a 2-divisional blast, maybe with the first division being, all whistles and bells, hyped up, sold vigorously. And the counties actually were not keen on that. So you can't just blame the ECB. The counties were fearful of that. I suppose they feared the fact that they might get marooned in that second tier. So that never happened. Hence, the 100 came along, which completely mucked up the schedule. But it's hard now to get rid of it. If you're a player, you cannot do anything other than embrace it and think it's fantastic. For 4 weeks in August, you can double your county salary. I mean, if I was still playing, I would think that would be wonderful. We're tied up with contracts with television companies. The television companies love the 100. So we're kind of stuck with it. And we've got the new regime, who I have a lot of respect for, trying to sort out what is practically an insoluble problem.
When they were at Surrey, of course, Richard Thompson and Richard Gould were pretty anti the 100, weren't they? But they obviously have to take a more collective view now.
Well, that's right. I mean, they were, I thought, laudably critical of the 100, mainly because Surrey had the financial independence to speak their mind, if you like. But if you were a chief executive of some of the poorer counties, you're just thinking, there's that 1.3 million that we're going to get, and that's going to help us through these hard times. At Surrey, they had the freedom to, if you like, to say what they thought, because they weren't so dependent on the promise of riches. But I quite understand that now that they are in charge, and the 100 is underway, and there have been many pluses to it, certainly for the women's game. And I mean, I was listening to Jamie Cox the other night, who's leaving Lords and coming to Somerset, but he ran the 100 at Lords, and he generally felt that there was a new audience going to cricket, a different audience, actually, quite a different audience that attended the Blast at Lords. So there are some pluses there, but we are stuck with it. There's a television contract which produces all the money, and I don't quite know how they're going to resolve the fact that the schedule is it just doesn't work, and it certainly doesn't work if you live where I live, because August becomes the best month if you like to play cricket. It becomes a barren month if you live, west of. I was going to say Bristol, but it applies to Bristol as well, actually.
Yeah.
So we get grumpy about that down here.
I'm sure you would. Yeah. So I'm just going to. I think I'm right in saying that the 100 as it stands can't be changed a few more years until the current TV deal runs out.
Well, I think that's more or less right. I think the TV deal goes to 2028. There is the possibility of not getting rid of it, but of tinkering with it if everyone's in agreement, i.e. possibly expanding it to 10 or something like that, if everyone is in agreement before that. But certainly it's with us. There is a contract there, and quite a lucrative contract to 2028. And I also think there's an appetite to keep going now, but quite how they... I mean, both the financiers and the players will be keen for it to continue in some form or another, because it makes money.
I'm going to bring in a question here from James West, actually, which is a pertinent one. He says, are you supportive of a 100 franchise based in Taunton? He has a sub-question, which I'll bring up later.
Well, I'll answer that very briefly. And actually, you always got to beware of anyone who says, honestly. I've been very critical of the 100. I don't like the advent of the 100. I thought it caused more problems than it solved. But whilst it exists, I'd like a franchise at Taunton, because we clubs like Somerset are terrified of being, not terrified, but very concerned about being left behind, and all the money and all the magnetism to get all the best players is with the test grounds. That's what, you could have a sort of brain drain, cricket drain, that after a while, and it's already started to happen. You only have to look at Dan Lawrence going from Essex to Surrey. I'm sure he's well paid at Essex. He's an Essex man. But Surrey, you go to Surrey, you're right there. You're almost guaranteed your slot in a 100 side. That's all connected. The players are looking to go towards those big clubs all the time, and this sort of hastens that divide. So that's a source of concern for clubs like Somerset, and that's one reason why we want to sort of still be at that top table somehow, even though we can't play much men or hardly have any men's international cricket there. But so that's my position. I never liked the 100. I think it was a mistake to bring it in as they did. But if it exists, I'd like some of my friends and other cricket followers down the West Coast have some cricket to watch in August.
And it's hard to believe that if Somerset players play for Welsh Fire, they have any sense of identity or pride in that particular team. And I think cricket's always survived, hasn't it, by the identity that people have for the team that they play for and the pyramid that exists. And so it surely makes sense.
Well, certainly. I mean, again, I danger of being too parochial. You watch Somerset play in the Blast, and there is a passion there and a lovely bond between players and supporters, and they think it's fantastic. Which obviously no one from Somerset would go over the bridge to go and watch Welsh Fire, I would have thought. Although they might be slightly more inclined now that Tom Abel's captain and there's one or two other Somerset players there, but no one would cross the bridge really to go and watch Welsh Fire. but they love the Blast. But having said all that, an identity starts to build. I mean, I've just glimpsed a bit of the IPL. It is phenomenal when you look at the IPL, which again were sides created out of nowhere. And I know with the parallel is not close, but you just look at the size of the crowds and the passion of the crowds. I know it's a different country, a different tradition, etc. And you can't argue with that. You can't. I mean, it's just phenomenal, the passion that creates. Now, I'm not suggesting the 100 achieves that, but I suppose after a while there might become an identity, but we don't notice it in this part of the world because there's no 100 near us. We don't care, really. But the players like it, and I would love it if I was a player now. Just imagine if you were good enough, get that 100 grand for 3 or 4 weeks in August. That's a nice little top up. And then if you're really successful, you'll get that franchise gig in South Africa or in Australia, or if you're really lucky, in India.
So I was just reading, and this was one of the questions by one of our members, Tim Bostock, who's the CEO at Durham.
Yes.
Was saying it's unlikely we'll still have 18 counties in 5 years' time. Now, I'm sure want a franchise in the northeast, and I suppose that would make sense. But there's also at the moment a lot of counties tendering for the 8 women's centres.
Yeah.
That are excellent, aren't there? And I wondered what your thoughts on whether his comments were there to sort of curry favour with the establishment and then get Durham one of the women's centres as well, which would help their cause further down the line.
Yeah. Well, I think, didn't he talk about county members being Luddites? Is that right?
He did, yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think they were very pleased with that down at Somerset, actually, because we like to think our members are not Luddites. They just love cricket. And I think that's true of most members. To suggest that all county members are Luddites and are totally resistant to any change seems a nonsense to me. And I think most county members, some will resist any change, no doubt, but most county members all they really want is to see good cricket throughout the summer at their nearby venue, at their club. And they will recognise that there are going to be changes. Things aren't going to stay the same. The game is moving so quickly at the moment. So I think the view is that whilst he may be right that we might lose counties, I don't know. It depends whether the ECB is always going to bail out. The precedent is that they've always found a way to rescue clubs that are in real financial strife up until now. But along the way, they might decide that they're not going to do that anymore, maybe. But I think it's an insult. And also this notion that people, people who go and watch red ball cricket are sort of from another age is a nonsense. I don't think that's true of the majority of Somerset members or the majority of members, around the country. So I thought that was an ill-advised. Whether he's trying to curry favour, I don't know. But and I'm sure Durham, like Somerset and most of the other counties, are keen to get a woman's franchise.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
Yeah. You don't want to be left behind.
But as I always say, I mean, I think the pyramids work so well for so many years that Daryl Mitchell was making the point that if you didn't have the 18 counties, it would cut the number of professional cricketers substantially and therefore reduce the wider standard of the England team, simply because people, say in Cumbria, wouldn't necessarily, they probably morph more to Lancashire, which would be one of the teams that would survive, but not everywhere would necessarily have that opportunity any longer.
Well, there's that notion, and there's also the notion that you want every fan in the country, every supporter, to have a relatively accessible place to go and watch the best cricket that's around, or best county cricket around. I think there were 3 sides or 3 teams that didn't apply for a women's franchise, or which were Derby, Worcestershire, and the MCC were entitled to apply but didn't. But they're mostly go to test grounds, I expect.
Would you? I know the MCC have made noises about having a team in the 100. That would seem to be quite a fanciful notion.
I don't know quite how well they've got. I'm not sure what Middlesex would make of that. Or I mean, they've got a team in the 100 essentially, or already. The one that plays at Lords was essentially run by, well, certainly Jamie Cox who's leaving the MCC, was overseeing a lot of what was happening with, what is it, London Spirit, isn't it, based at Lords. So they sort of got one already. They can't have two.
Yeah. So what you're probably thinking is that when they if they do add to the teams, one in Durham and one in Taunton would make sense.
Yeah, well, certainly the latter I would agree with, and again, there's a geographical sort of argument for. I mean, Durham is quite a long way from Leeds, I guess. There is a resistance. Essentially, the 8 existing 100 teams, by and large, the impression is that they like the status quo, and the cake would have to be divided slightly differently if there were other teams joining. But we'll wait and see. It's I think by the end of this summer, after all the agonizing, someone's going to have to come up with what they see as the solution, but they've got to get it voted through. So it's a real juggling act for the two Richards. I mean, I've got a lot of confidence actually. I think they're both, they demand the more confidence and trust than their predecessors. They've shown over the years that they've got an affinity for sort of county cricket, and they understand how it works. But they've got a tricky problem to resolve.
Yeah. So I'm going to James West had a second part to his question, which and I'm going to add in the start of it, and then add his bit in. But what do you make of the return of Colin Graves to Yorkshire? And what are your views on private investment in county cricket? Was James's question.
Well, there was a certain inevitability about Colin Graves coming back. I wouldn't say I was punching the air with joy when I read that. But they ain't got any money. And this was, I think, it sounds like this was about the only way they could get near to getting the books balanced. So that's probably enough on that. But it's a bizarre twist, but you can imagine how there would have been plenty at Yorkshire who were keen to have him back come what may, but it was the money that must have swung it. On outside investment, I think you'll find that all the counties, they're not all Luddites, even beyond the members. They will keep an eye open about the possibility of investment from outside. And I don't know whether the members club will be sustained over the next decade or two. And actually, I think all the members that I come across, I think the bulk of the members I come across, they just want some sort of guarantee that at their local club they can go and watch watch lots of cricket of the highest possible standard. And I'm not sure the bulk of the members are too bothered about the constitution, and they just want to be, they want their season ticket. Now, maybe there will be a few who are more concerned about how things are run and the sort of politics of it. But I think the vast majority, they just want to be able to go and watch the best possible cricket at the best time during the summer. They love the game. And I don't think I don't know, perhaps, people should tell me that that's wrong. But particularly, Cricket Society people who are involved, they might think otherwise. But that's my sort of hunch.
A couple more questions on the English season ahead. this year sees the introduction, I think I'm right in saying, for the first time, of hybrid pitches.
Yes. Well, my quick view on hybrid pitches is there's clearly a case for them. A lot of places, the practice facilities are on the square, and a hybrid pitch has a longer life than a normal pitch. It doesn't disintegrate so quickly, so you can use it for longer, which is why it's good for practice, but also I think possibly for one-day cricket. There's a lot of one-day games at some grounds, particularly grounds that get a women's franchise as well. There'll be more cricket played there. The hybrid pitch works well for one-day cricket. It doesn't. It's usually very batter friendly, but you can also use it, I think, 3 or 4 times, and it's still a good pitch. What is less good about hybrid pitches, although I'm not an expert on it, and it always slightly confuses me, at this age where anything is possible, is that they don't disintegrate or they don't deteriorate. The best cricket pitches in red ball cricket should deteriorate. And it always slightly frustrates me that we haven't come across a way of creating a surface that kind of does all the right things, all the traditional things we want it to, sort of move it around a little bit for the seamers early on, flatten out, and then start to break up so it spins. And we don't seem to be able to produce those, very easily. But certainly a hybrid pitch, its characteristics are that it stays together and doesn't get any worse. So I'm a bit wary of playing much red ball cricket on a hybrid pitch, because I just think it won't be balanced enough. It'll be too much in favour of the batsman. But for one-day cricket, and also trying to, make full use of squares that aren't really quite big enough for all the matches that have to be played, they're valuable, and certainly they're valuable for practicing outside as well.
That's interesting. And then this year there's a split between the use of the Duke's ball and the Kookaburra ball.
Well, we played with the Kookaburra last year, a few games. I mean, the thing in favour of the Kookaburra is that generally, after about 30 overs, it doesn't do anything. The seam, I mean, I played with the Kookaburra many years ago when I played in Australia, and the seam is far less pronounced. And after about 30 overs, it doesn't do anything. It stops swinging. And it does, certainly the seam kind of flattens out even more. It's never as high as a Duke seam. So you could argue it's quite helpful in that you will probably have to get more slow bowlers going, more spin bowlers. It won't be pace oriented. I mean, we'll find, no doubt, at the beginning of this summer, or at the beginning of this spring, that the Duke's ball will be leaping around, it will be swinging, and it keeps swinging for longer. The seam is a bit prouder, and it'll be hard work for batsmen if it stays this damp and cloudy, if they can ever get out of there. So there is some virtue in the Kookaburra in that there's about 40 overs where you think will seem that, unless it reverse swings, there's nothing there for the seamers. So you're going to have to turn to your slower bowlers, and they're going to have to do more work and learn how to bowl on surfaces that are not offering much. So that's a plus. And my recollection from last year, there were 2 or 3 games they played with Kookaburras that they were still interesting games of cricket. The way the game's played now, you don't get any draws anyway if it stays fine for 4 days. So I think it's an experiment worth continuing with. That's my slightly. I don't want 74-mile-an-hour seam bowlers causing havoc all through the season. They have their little flurry in the first 3 weeks when pace. I mean, it doesn't help that you've got the ball zipping around all over the place. So it doesn't matter whether you bowl at 75 or 90. 75 is perfectly good enough. It's jagging around all over the place and you can control it. But it doesn't really happen like that very often in Test cricket.
The last question from me. There are a couple of other sub-questions which I'll probably bring up at the end if that's all right. But Durham played last year. They increased their run rate per over quite substantially, and so it was widely termed that they, even though they were in Division Two, they played very entertaining cricket, and they played baseball in the sense they were trying to go along at 4 and over and more. Alex Lees, who didn't really do that when he played for England, was, I think, one of the had a strike rate which was very, very impressive last season. And Ollie Robinson, the wicket keeper, I think is now being touted as a potential England wicket keeper because he scores his runs so fast. Is that the way that every county should be playing the game these days?
Well, there's no compulsion to play any way. I think if you are a young pro now, at the moment, well, two things. One is I've always thought the best way to play cricket is to score fast and bowl dry. Be mean with the ball, but aggressive with the bat. Because often people forget that even the best bowlers, if their good ball goes for 4 now and again, they wonder where do I go? So I mean, I like the notion of having a very aggressive outlook with the bat, and it's been, fascinating watching England try and play like that, and sometimes being brilliantly successful. I hadn't been aware that Durham have adopted this, but I think if you're a young pro now or an ambitious professional, you feel you've got to start playing a bit like that because that's the way you get picked for England. So I think that will have a change amongst that tier of batsmen who are on the edge. I mean, you feel a bit for someone like Jennings at Lancashire, who's a sort of slightly old style cricketer, but who scores a lot of runs. But at the moment, quite understandably, in a way, when it's a choice between a Jennings and a Duckett, you go Duckett.
Yeah.
McCullum and co will go Duckett, and you can't quarrel with what they've done. I look on, again, parochially, Tom Abel, he's a really good player, but is a sort of traditional player in many ways, although his one-day cricket has advanced. And I'm sure in the back of his mind is, I've got to score a lot of runs, but I need to score them quite quickly. So I think batsmen in particular see it as a career move to play more aggressively now because that's what gets you into the England team. I don't know whether this is just a phase or whether it'll last a long time. We'll wait and see. So that's how they're going to play. In the field, it's slightly different. Just got to get wickets. And there's a lot of virtue in keeping even England in the field at various points have recognised the need to squeeze the batsman rather than be gung-ho about everything. Occasionally, I had chats with Jack Leach, not obviously this winter, but in the summer, when we played against Pakistan in that series a year or so ago, and they had a little left-hander, and Jack would come on, he'd get hit over mid-wicket, and then he'd get hit over mid-wicket again, and nothing wrong with the balls, and I saw him, and I said, God, Jack, why don't you give yourself just a bit of security and stop him having that little easy clip of, he said, I quite like that idea, but Ben doesn't want me to have one of that. And he was very happy to go along. He loves Ben Stokes. He loves playing for England, but he said, Ben's not very keen on that. But actually, I think Stokes, throughout this series and sometimes last summer, there are times where he recognises that it's not just about being gung-ho after wickets, but if you can squeeze the batsmen, they tend to make more mistakes nowadays. But in answer to your question, I think it will have an impact. I think batsmen will look to score more quickly. Durham have obviously taken a kind of group decision to do that. We've got a new captain at Somerset. I think he's inclined to make sure that we don't, are not too canny. We want to play an aggressive game. And it's exciting to watch by and large. So I think you're right. It will happen more frequently. The county cricket will start to try and mirror what they're doing at the highest level, partly for the self-interest of batsmen who want to make an impact by showing they can get 100 balls in the standard test match manner.
Thank you. So I think it's time to morph now into matters surrounding the national team. A few weeks ago, we had a very instructive talk by James Taylor, the former England player, been selector and now coach at Leicester, amongst many other things. And I asked him about what it was like to captain Ben Stokes on the England Lions tour. And his comment was, he said he went out every night, and if he could come back and gone out again, he would have done that too. So he was absolutely amazed that Ben Stokes has turned out to be such a successful England captain. Did you have?
Was he?
Did you have?
I'm amazed
that he might make a success of it.
Well, he has made a success of it. You can't deny. I mean, we talk about Shoaib and Hartley, and the way he gives them confidence somehow is amazing. And the way he frees them up. I know that they've just lost heavily in India, but essentially what they've done is extraordinary to take away all that, so much stress and that fear of failure, and to give them license to go and play their natural game. Curiously, the people who frustrate me most of the England lineup is one of the best players England have ever had, Joe Root. And for a while it was Stokes, although in the last tour, Stokes he's become one of our more defensive players. I mean, I didn't know. I had misgivings. You shouldn't pigeonhole people, but going back, I'm thinking about Flintoff as captain, my old colleague Ian Botham as captain. Well, it clearly didn't work for Both. It didn't really work for Flintoff. Kind of affected him too much. Would Stokes fall into that category? Now, Stokes did it a lot later in his career than certainly Ian did. And there is no doubt that even though I don't agree with everything he does on the field, he's got some magic about him, this pairing of McCullum and Stokes. I always think back to the 2015 World Cup, the one where England, they just at the last minute, they sacked Alistair Cook and Owen Morgan was made captain. Peter Moores, a highly respected coach, was in charge. And I always remember sort of going into that tournament, and Moores would have said something along the lines of, we want our boys to play with freedom, we want them to express ourselves, and we're going to play an aggressive game. And then a day later, they'd announced the team with Gary Balance at 3, and, i.e. a very sort of cautious sort of selection. So it wasn't quite credible what they were saying one thing, but kind of doing another. Whereas that Morgan regime and then subsequently with Stokes, when they say you've got freedom to go out, they believe them. They've got, they've demonstrated that they believe them, the way they themselves play and the way they continue selecting them. So it is extraordinary what they've done. And I keep going back to Leach, he loves, even though he doesn't get his deep mid wicket as often as he loves playing in this setup. In fact, he said to me, he's one of the few cricketers who's not been a golfer. Doesn't really play golf, or hasn't done. But he said, I had to go and buy a set and get some lessons because otherwise I was left on my own on tour. There was no one left in the hotel. So I bought myself a set of clubs and I've had a few lessons, and then one or two are trying to help me out because he was abandoned. Everyone else is on the golf course. I mean, it's sort of crazy, but you have to admire it. And I mean, as I say, there are moments where you think, oh, why throw away that advantage? When Joe Root, the brilliant Joe Root, gets that reverse hitting, when England have on the brink of taking control of the game, it drives you scatty. But on balance, what they've done, remember what it was like at the end of Root's career as captain. They couldn't buy a win. And whatever happens this summer against less demanding opposition, I think it'll be quite entertaining. So Stokes has been astonishing. It's an amazing story, isn't it? From being the man James Taylor describes, who's out all night and totally uncontrollable, to the man who kind of just like a sort of avuncular father figure who looks after all these novices coming into his team and giving them the freedom to go out and have fun. I'm not sure it was quite such fun when in the 80s it was, you were more frightened of making mistakes. They're not frightened of making these mistakes. And it's amazing how they've managed to get into that mindset. It means you don't get dropped very easily.
No, it's harder to get into the team and harder to go out of it than come into it, presumably. On that note, one of the questions that we received is from Tim. I'm afraid that the second name hasn't come through, but he's thinking ahead to November 2025 and the first Ashes test in Brisbane. And he's saying, the several fast bowlers currently in the frame for the England test team, which two or three would you expect to be playing in that match?
Well, Anderson, obviously. No, well, it's a difficult question, actually, because there was a moment where we thought our fast bowling stocks were looking rather good, but I'm not so sure anymore. Mark Wood is about 34. He's quite old, Mark Wood. And so our bowling attack in India, Wood, Robinson and Anderson, there, with the best will in the world, I don't think Anderson's going to be there. Wood will be struggling to be there, and he certainly wouldn't be expected to play more than 2 or 3 tests. He's I don't know if you'll be able to tell me, but he must be 34. He's quite old, and it's wonderful that he keeps wanting to play Test cricket rather than take the franchise buck. So and then we've got Ollie Robinson, who, well, has the possibility. It's not totally. It has moments where you think this man is made to play for England, and then you're not so sure. And who are the other pacemen? Well, they're not. I'm not sure that that they're building. I mean, it would be a source of concern. I think. I'm just trying to think. There's all these sort of tongues and pots and who have flickered and are good, if you like, honest county cricketers who could progress. Archer's disappeared, and well, he might, but you can't. I can't envisage Archer, and I'm guessing having a significant red ball career, but he could come back and have a significant white ball career. So the answer to the question is, I have no idea.
It is a concern, I think, isn't it?
I mean, I suppose the only thing to say that would be encouraging, I hadn't thought about that far ahead, mind, is that surely the likes of Mitchell Stark, Pat Cummins, Hazelwood, they must be creaking by then as well, because they've been so rock solid. They've played a lot of cricket for Australia, and they haven't had to dig too deep to find anyone else.
Yes,
I haven't looked that far forward. I don't expect McCullum and Stokes have either, actually.
No.
They're still there.
Ollie Robinson seems to be a bit of a conundrum, as you implied there. He's got some extremely good statistics. I think it's something like 75 to 80 Test wickets at a very good average. And but he showed up in India and bowled at 75 miles an hour, and they obviously want him to bowl a bit faster than that. Is he a real conundrum, or is it? Have you seen this often with cricketers down the years that some days they can do it and some days they simply can't?
Well, I don't know. It's a simple answer. All I know is that at his best, particularly in English sort of conditions, although he bowled very well in Pakistan, whenever it was, you think this man is made for Test cricket. He's not mega quick, but he's a kind of McGrath type automaton, height, hits seam, not quite as quick as McGrath, but nonetheless has that control, etc. And he looked terrific. But I think, he's a slightly odd character, and I think they get a bit frustrated with him occasionally, and there has been a few fitness issues here and there. It was odd, wasn't it? When they doled out the central contracts, Ollie Robinson got a 1-year contract, and Mark Wood, for reasons perhaps other than, got a 3-year contract. And I'm sure that was partly because they wanted to to ensure that Mark Wood didn't go for the franchise buck totally. Whereas Ollie Robinson was not, is not sought after for that sort of cricket. So I don't know. In English conditions, if he's fit, you would have Ollie Robinson there straight away. But obviously, there was something going on. I think they were a bit fed up with him after that one Test match, even though he batted. Actually, he got 50, and he certainly looked like a batsman for the first time.
Yes, he dropped the catch as well, which seemed catchable.
Yeah, that's right. So I think he's just not entirely trustworthy. He's not quite there, but he's gifted.
And we certainly need him.
Yeah. They still need him, I would have thought. Well, certainly next summer, if he's fit on merit, he gets in the team. So I would have thought.
Yeah, so just moving it back a little bit to this summer, John Hooper's asked whether we've talked about Anderson or Wood already, but he's mentioned Folkes and Bairstow, and who might be keeping wicket for us this summer.
Well, I mean, my guess would still be Folkes, but I don't think it'll be Bairstow somehow. I mean, they don't like dropping people. But you've got Harry Brook coming back. Harry Brook, I see, is going to play for Yorkshire almost from the word go after a sort of blank winter. I mean, at some point they're going to have to move on and make a choice about Bairstow. Bairstow, I'm not sure he doesn't look to me totally fit enough to be. I mean, to be a keeper batsman now. There was some frustration with Folkes simply because he didn't score that many runs, but I thought he kept pretty well out there. And obviously it's more demanding in many ways, being up to the stumps all the time. So I would have thought Folkes has still got a chance of playing. I would have thought Folkes has got a better chance of playing than Bairstow at the moment. But as I say, they have a lot of faith. But they have a conundrum if everyone's fit, that Brook is back, and surely if he's anywhere near the sort of form he showed earlier on, he's got to play. In which case, I still think there'd be a case now for Folkes having the gloves rather than Bairstow, because the guarantee of Bairstow's runs has diminished, and also I feel as if his mobility's diminished a bit.
Yes.
But we'll see.
And if you were looking at other players apart from bowlers, your man in Somerset, James Rue, had a fabulous summer. He's still, I think, just 20 years of age, 5 centuries and kept wicket in the championship team. His chances of progressing.
Well, he was phenomenal last year. And he's an unusual young cricketer in that he bats a bit like an old-timer. He's got all the fancy, modern shots, but he would be prepared, and he had a few opportunities to do it, sort of coming in at 50 for 4, to bide his time and score 10 runs in 50 balls in the knowledge that he wasn't going to get out, and then he'd settle in, and then he'd get his hundreds, which is remarkable for a 20-year-old nowadays. So he's got that maturity that he can bat in a, if you like, an old-fashioned manner, which you don't see many sort of recent teenagers doing. I mean, the only danger from our point of view is your expectations. There used to be that second season syndrome where, for some reason, it didn't happen again, and players worked you out. And I'm not saying that's going to happen to him this time, but he'd be hard pressed to have such a good season this time round. And he kept perfectly well too. We didn't notice his keeping, but we'll see. I would have thought they'd stay with Folkes actually initially.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
For Surrey fans, that's good news anyway. Good. So I think we've done an hour now, and I think you've been incredibly interesting and given us so much. So thank you very much for that. But I just wondered if I could follow up with one or two specific questions from people who sent them in on the chat, which don't necessarily come through on our theme. The first one, which I must say I rather like, was from Tony Newby, which said, which cricket club did you join first? And were you an off spinner, as I guess as a schoolboy, or did that develop later?
Well, the first cricket club I sort of played for with any regularity was in South Somerset. It was North Perrott Cricket Club, which in those days was a wonderful, wonderful ground, but a little thatched pavilion. They got a big one now. And then I sort of from school I developed. And I actually got, I mean, people find this hard to believe, but I got my first contract at Somerset as a specialist batsman. I bowled a bit of off spin at school and youth cricket, but essentially I played for England. I played for England schools or England under-19s with Chris Tavray and probably Alistair Hignall and Nigel Bryars. And I was picked, I didn't bowl at all. I was in for I know people will be aghast at this, but I was there for my batting. And when I joined Somerset initially, if I got into the first team in the first couple of years, I would be in the sort of top 6 or 7 primarily as a batsman. Then I learned to bowl a bit at university, where I was at Oxford, where you had a fantastic opportunity to play against all these county sides. And I looked at and I've never been the most sort of overconfident sort of character, but I saw our sort of spin bowler, and I think, and I was in the team as a batsman, and I said to our captain, I think I could probably bowl, as well as he is, and you could play an extra batsman if you want. So I started bowling lots of overs there. Which not excited, maybe overstating it, but interested Somerset, because in those days you seemed to be able to pick up batsmen here, there, and everywhere, but bowlers were harder to come by. And then so I evolved as a off-spinning all-rounder, I suppose. But I was a batsman as a kid.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Just moving on to David Whittingham. He's asked. We just briefly mentioned Yorkshire earlier, but he's asking, and I sort of vaguely read about this, that one of Colin Graves' aims is to potentially re-employ some of the coaches that were fired in 2021. Now, you'd think that would be a PR disaster, but and I don't know whether there's any truth in that, but it's a very good question.
Well, I don't know either. But nothing he does would surprise me. No. And I'm sure there's an element that some of the coaches at Yorkshire during that period, got a raw deal. I mean, Yorkshire's... There was a brief period where Somerset tried to rival Yorkshire in terms of controversy, but we've only for a brief period. I mean, but whether it's the boycott era, the sacking of Brian Close, or now this, Yorkshire do it with a bit more pizzazz than anywhere else, it seems to me. But I hadn't read that, and but nothing would surprise me. I see.
Good. Well, thank you. No, it'll be fascinating to see what happens there. They have a habit of tearing themselves apart, so I'm sure that they'll probably try and have another go at it.
Well, I remember, so I've been writing something for Somerset's 150th anniversary, and a bit about Closey, and I dug up a bit about Brian Sellers came to the view that sacking Brian Close was the worst decision of his life.
Well, it benefited you, didn't it?
Yeah, it benefited us down in the West Country.
And the final question I've got here, unless anyone else wants to put one on the chat, is from Phil Veazey. And Phil's asked how, partially answered this thing already, but how do you see the 4-day game 5 years from now? And I guess what he's saying is, will we still be playing 14 games a season in the county championship, or will there be more? Will there be less?
Well, I don't think there'll be more. That's fairly certain. I mean, I remember sitting in some committee meeting at Somerset a decade or more ago, probably, and where they said, we will not have more than 12 games next year or the year after. Well, that hasn't actually happened. You might get a trade-off, actually, of I don't know what you think about this, but if we could have 12 championship matches that took place during the summer as opposed to early spring and early autumn, that might be a satisfactory deal. I don't know. To actually play red ball cricket in the summer would be a bonus. But what I do know, I mean, again is based on my West Country, is that at Somerset and at quite a few other counties, the notion that it's one man and a dog going to watch Championship cricket is a nonsense. There is still, and then, I mean, there never was a golden age in my time. There might have been just after the war, in the late 40s, early 50s, where tens of thousands of people went to watch. When I was playing with all the best players in the world in the 80s, 70s, and 80s playing county cricket, you weren't getting massive crowds watching county cricket. And I'm not sure the crowds are any much different now as in 1982 or whatever it is. It's just not practicable. But there is a huge interest still in perhaps it's my generation partly. They may not all physically be at the ground, but they will be watching the scoreboard. Some of them nowadays will be watching all the streams. And there's still a great fascination about the longer game and a great interest. It's just that it's not always visible in the stands, but all those stands, you go to Taunton, you go to Worcester, or you go to some of the smaller grounds, and there's a lovely atmosphere still there. It's worth preserving. And certainly in this part of the world, there is still a great appetite for it. And we have this, wonderful aging population. It seems an opportunity that we shouldn't miss. So I'm hopeful that it will be sustained. And I come from a county that's never won the championship. And when we win it, I want it to be worth winning. That's sort of, I don't want it to be some, tin pot competition, a little bit like the 50 over game has gone to, that no one really bothers about. So I have blind optimism about that.
Good. Well, just in case you were thinking you'd be able to nip off for your supper, I've now had three further questions.
Okay, go on.
I'm answering those. Thanks. Mike Challicum says, have you read today's article in The Guardian titled "The Gap Between County Cricket's Haves and Have-Nots is Growing Extremely Wide"? And I think you probably partially answered that, haven't you, and said that you do feel that there is a gap.
I'll have to go and have a look because I have to keep. Who's written it? I wonder.
Mike will probably tell us in a moment.
Well, don't worry.
Ben Bloom.
Oh, right. Who's he? I don't remember him. But I think that the argument holds water. I mean, there's always been the test ground. I mean, some of the test ground clubs are really struggling, Yorkshire in particular, and the others have got, one or two of the others have got significant debts. But there's always been this notion that a test ground enables you, it gives you great potential for making pots of money. And that now is increased by the presence of the 100, which are obviously based essentially at test grounds. So you're right, the haves and the have-nots. We've had a sort of pay, what do you call it, ceiling for years in cricket, but no side has ever really got anywhere near it, or the only side that could get near it, if they wished to, was probably Surrey. So there is a huge, and you only have to look what happens with promising players, talented players from Leicestershire. They'll go to Nottinghamshire, or Nottinghamshire is a magnet for that. Any county player will be interested in an offer from Surrey, I'm sure. So the big clubs, the likes of Essex and ourselves at Somerset and one or two others are sort of desperately trying to swim against the tide to not be subsumed by that. But I agree with the initial I haven't read the piece actually.
Yeah.
The haves and the have not. The gap is getting bigger and bigger, and I suppose it's mirrored in football as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the oddity that the charm of cricket often, although Surrey have now won 2 in a row, is that the connection between huge resources and winning trophies has not been so direct in cricket as it's become in football. But it'll probably go more that way.
Thank you. So Tony Newby has got a further question. He obviously asked one earlier, but he is pining a little bit for the past. I guess we all love this fixture, which was when the tourists played the counties. It sounds as though, from what you were saying about the schedule, that would be completely impractical to fit it in these days. But do you think that could ever happen again?
Well, no, I don't actually, because the tourists don't want to play. Everyone's now got into the rhythm of essentially pitching up, having some internal practice, maybe one game into a test series, which is a great shame. I mean, the tours are much. I mean, when I was a kid, the Australians would arrive probably on the 1st of May or something, or early May, and they would leave mid-September. And after the last test match, they played 2 or 3 matches, at Scarborough and all sorts. And when I was playing, if Australia were the tourists, as a county, you were desperate to have a fixture, preferably an early fixture, because you get a lot of people through the gate. People were curious, what's this next batch of Australians like? And then there'd be a bit of battle because some of the senior players might not want to play, but the chief executive wanted to make sure you had a good game that lasted the 3 days probably. So those fixtures, I mean, England's tour of India is the way it's all gone. They didn't play a single warm-up game in India. They went to UAE. They played a couple of test matches and then they went back to UAE again, had a bit of a breather. So the whole rhythm has changed radically, which is as I say, it's a pity. And I mean, that squeezed Ashes of last summer, was it last summer? It's a pity because it's sort of the old Ashes series kind of occupied about 3 months, and it was like a sort of soap opera that went on and on and on. Whereas obviously last summer it was 6 weeks to accommodate the 100, etc. And you didn't have time to get to know the characters, whereas in you used to sort of get to know the tourists gradually as the season went on. But so I understand the craving, but I don't think it's going to happen.
No. I always used to feel, when I was a child, very sorry for, you'd always have 1 or 2 players from tourists who never got to play a test match, but they played every game.
In between, they probably went home averaging 73, having scored hundreds here, there, and everywhere. And you would bring people. I mean, they would have. I think Lara toured England, probably, and didn't play a test match. He toured as a youngster. But there would be a lot like that who went on tour and were picked to go on tour just to gain experience and probably play about 10 matches in between the test matches and be well prepared for the next tour. But cricket has changed so much. It's so volatile at the moment that I don't think we'll be going back to that.
And yes, with all the people with their going to the different franchises as well, they just don't have time to do operation. Yeah. I mean, in one sense, if you want to make money, now's the time to be a professional cricketer. But it's much more complicated. I mean, I never had an agent, but I would have to have. You've got to have an agent now because you've got all these possibilities every winter, and indeed during the English summer now in the US and the Caribbean. You need an agent to sort out, what's the best option, and for the game needs responsible agents too to take the longer view. Quite interesting, actually, that quite a few of the England Test players have kind of opted out of IPL even this time around. But I definitely have an agent now. If I was, and I'd be keen to get one of these franchises in South Africa for 3 or 4 weeks and see if I can pick up 100 and whatever it is grand. Lovely. Yes. So going slightly further afield, David Carey is talking about the Ashes again for
Oh my goodness.
2025. And he's saying, assuming that Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, and Sydney are a given as locations,
Mm.
where would you like the fifth test to be, Perth or Hobart? Because I think was Perth out of action on the last series and the new stadium being built, and they did play the final test in Hobart, if I recall
Yeah,
correctly.
yeah. Well, they didn't do very well there. That was
No.
the first time England have played a test in Hobart.
So
Uh,
naturally, it would be Perth, presumably.
yeah, I mean they've built this massive new stadium. I mean I've got a soft spot for Perth because I had 2 winters out there and played a season for WA. And even though it's not a beautiful ground, the Wacker is an amazing ground, partly for the surface. God, I've never seen it. I remember going there to watch when I was playing grade cricket out there, and the West Indies were playing Australia in this one-day game, and Holding was bowling to whoever was Graham Wood, I think, and I was square on, and I've never seen any wicketkeeper stand so far back. They could have run a single every time. Dujon was keeping wicket, and Holding was gliding in, whoosh, and he must have been 35 yards back, Dujon, and still taking the ball above his, boom. So I would, yes, I've got a soft spot for Perth, so I would go Perth. But I don't know whether it necessarily suits us. Well, actually, we like playing some shots. You can play some shots at Perth, but it zips. Well, it used to zip through at the Wacker, and I think it's still fairly quick at the new stadium they've built. So Perth, please.
Yes, good. Mike Kimpson said, "Did you ever take a wicket in the last over before lunch in a championship match at Taunton?" So a very specific question.
Well, how can I possibly know the answer to that? Well, I don't know. I don't. There's a leading question, but I'm not quite sure where it's leading to. I mean, I very often, no doubt, bowled the last over before lunch because that's you get tossed that. And I don't remember that so much as I remember bowling. If we were so cynical, we were all very hungry, and the clock hadn't quite got to the appropriate hour. So I do remember, and I'm ashamed of it, but bowling 1 or 2 deliberate no balls to ensure that no more overs needed to be bowled. We'd go and have our lunch. But I didn't like bowling the 1 over before lunch because you got to try and get loose, and just to get loose for 6 balls, it's a waste of energy. But I don't know what he's. I mean, I'm guessing the answer is yes, but I don't know.
Well, you must to get your 859 wickets. You must, as you said, bowled an awful lot of overs. So remembering,
and conceded an awful lot of runs too.
So our final question is from our stalwart former chair, Nigel Hancock.
Oh my goodness! Hello, Nigel.
Yeah, this is a bit of an in-joke, I suspect. He said, "Hi, Vic. You used to love the 50-over competition, brilliantly won by Leicestershire last season."
Yes. Well done, Leicestershire. But did anyone notice? That's the trouble. It's been diminished. And well done, Leicestershire. And without getting too parochial, I was a bit disappointed that Somerset's second team couldn't win the trophy, or indeed Surrey's second team for that matter. But no, it cheered me up, Nigel. And who knows? There might be another promotion. I don't know. It's getting a bit tight up there in the football.
Leicester falling apart a bit, aren't they?
Yeah. Well. But I mean, there are some virtues about the current 50 over. We could be serious, but all those sides that have got so many 100 players do feel that it's, it means that they're not going to really compete. So I suppose it offers everyone a chance to win something. He said patronisingly towards Leicester.
Well, I think we should let you go now. You've been incredibly helpful. Thank you very much for sparing an hour and a quarter with us.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Peter, and good to meet you.
And I thank you, all the members as well who attended. As you can see, Vic, there are a number of them applauding you there, so that's well worth it. But I don't think we've all thoroughly enjoyed.
It's Nigel. I can't see. I've lost him.
Yes, no, he's giving you the thumbs up as well.
Okay.
So I think it's been great, and thank you. And we wish you and everyone attending a happy Easter, and
well, let's
enjoy the summer ahead. We'll look forward to hearing what you've got to say. Thanks again.
Cheers, Peter.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.